Welcome to the Multicultural Grants Program online grant tutorials. In this video, we will discuss the essential steps for organizations after your application is granted funding, including returning your grant agreement, requirements for spending grant funds, keeping a record of grant expenditure, acknowledging grant support, tips for a quality report, and what to do if your project changes. For more information on the Multicultural Grants Program, you can view the online grant tutorials, read the frequently asked questions, download the funding guidelines, or contact the Multicultural Affairs Grants team. Congratulations on receiving Multicultural Grants Program funding for your project. The first step for successful applicants is to accept your grant offer by returning a signed copy of your funding agreement. Successful applicants will receive a physical copy of their funding agreement, along with their notification letter, by post. The agreement will be addressed to the public officer and outline the approved grant purpose, budget items, and grant amount, and the reports required during and/or at the completion of the project. Organizations must read the funding agreement thoroughly before accepting the grant offer. To accept the grant offer, organizations must sign the funding agreement and scan and upload every page to the online agreement and invoice upload form in the Smarty Grants account. Partial scans of the agreement will not be accepted. Organizations must also upload their tax invoice and bank confirmation statement to the agreement and invoice upload form. Address your invoice to Department of the Premier and Cabinet, Multicultural Affairs. The tax invoice must include the organization's contact details, ABN, and bank details. The bank confirmation statement provided must match the bank details on the tax invoice. All grants have a cutoff date for accepting the grant offer. This is highlighted on page 1 of your funding agreement. You may not receive your funds if you do not submit your signed funding agreement before this date. Once grant funds are received, there are guidelines every organization must follow to ensure you are spending grant funds in line with the signed funding agreement. If these guidelines are not followed, you may be required to return the grant funds. First, funds must be spent within the grant term. This is the date period in which you will complete your project. Your funding agreement will set out the grant term with a start date and an end date. Second, funds must only be spent on the approved budget items listed in your funding agreement. If you need to alter the budget items in any way, or if you are concerned that you will be unable to spend all funds within the grant term, you must notify Multicultural Affairs. Finally, you must keep records of all grant spending. You must retain and provide receipts or salary transaction records for all expenditure of $100 or more. Records of expenditure must meet certain standards that clearly demonstrate the grant funds are being used appropriately and for the approved purpose. It is recommended that organizations keep track of grant spending through the project budget and retain physical and electronic copies of all receipts. And avoid paying for grant budget items using cash or withdrawing or transferring the full grant fund into a personal account for management by an individual. Your record keeping speaks to your organization's capacity to manage grant funds. Providing evidence of grant expenditure is a requirement of your funding agreement. If sufficient evidence is not provided, you will be required to return grant funds. Every organization receiving funding through the Department of the Premier and Cabinet is asked to include the Supported By logo on any marketing and communication materials related to the supported project. Examples of marketing and communications materials include print programs, posters, flyers and newsletters, email correspondence, social media posts, and website inclusions promoting the funded project. Any marketing materials containing the department's logo must be approved in writing by a member of the grants team prior to publishing. Email a copy of your marketing materials to multicultural.sa.gov.au. Copies of the logo and branding guidelines are available to download from the Multicultural Affairs website. To meet the branding guidelines, organizations must ensure the correct variation of the logo is used, including the supported by text. The minimum size of the logo roundel is 10 millimeters. The logo is on a plain background, and there is a clear space measuring 25% of the diameter of the roundel surrounding the logo on all sides. The full color version of the logo is preferred where possible. If it is not possible to include a logo, a text acknowledgement can be used instead. Acknowledgement must follow the approved wording of supported by a grant from the Department of the Premier and Cabinet. It is important to keep records of any marketing and communications materials to include in your final report. At the end of the grant term, all successful applicants are required to submit a project evaluation and grant expenditure report. A sample template of the report is attached to your funding agreement. The final report is due 1 month after the end of the grant period. If your report becomes overdue, you will not be eligible to receive any new grants until your report is finalized. Before it can be submitted, your report must be signed by 2 delegates of your organization's management committee. One of these delegates must be the public officer. After a report is submitted, it will be assessed to ensure the grant project was delivered, the grant funds were appropriately and fully expended, and the grant purpose was met. A high-quality report will demonstrate all of this by including an accurate description of what activities took place, including when, where, and who participated. A detailed description of the benefit to the community, including who benefited and how. Photo documentation of events, equipment, or infrastructure upgrades. Copies of marketing and communications materials, including evidence of acknowledgement. An accurate summary of grant expenditure, with budget items matching the approved budget in your grant agreement. And satisfactory evidence of grant expenditure, including receipts for all items of $100 or more. If your organization follows reasonable grant management and project management procedures over the course of the grant term, completing your report should be simple. Grant funds must be spent on the items and to meet the purpose outlined in your funding agreement. But what happens if your project changes? Multicultural Affairs understands that sometimes plans must change. A venue may withdraw, a musician may suddenly fall ill, or an item of equipment may suddenly increase or decrease in cost. Importantly, you must notify Multicultural Affairs of any changes to your proposed project. In some cases, a formal variation to your funding agreement may be required. Variations to the funding agreement may be negotiated and agreed in writing between the organization and Multicultural Affairs. However, the total grant amount will not change. Organizations can request a variation by contacting the grants team. After reviewing your request, the grants team may open an online form for you to upload details of the changes to your project, including quotes for new or altered expenditure items for approval. You must not alter your project or expenditure without written approval from Multicultural Affairs. Requests for a variation can only be made during the grant term. No variations will be accepted after the term ends. It is important to read your funding agreement thoroughly and comply with all expenditure and reporting requirements. Contact the grants team to discuss any concerns with delivering or reporting on your funded project. The team is available to answer your questions from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Monday to Friday. You can reach the grants team by email at multiculturalaffairs@sa.gov.au or by phone on 1300 239 468.